First contact. Commander Vexteller's crystalline sensory appendages flickered with barely contained skepticism as their shuttle descended toward Earth's International Defense Academy. The massive complex sprawled across what the humans called the Rocky Mountains, its architecture a jarring mix of sleek modern design and raw functionality that seemed to epitomize humanity's contradictory nature. "Welcome to IDA, Commander," said Admiral Chen, her weathered face betraying no emotion as she greeted the alien dignitary. "We're honored to host the Galactic Council's first official inspection of our training facilities." Vexteller's translator processed her words, but the commander was more focused on analyzing the facility's exterior defenses, or rather, the apparent lack thereof. No energy shields, no orbital cannons, not even basic plasma turrets, just simple kinetic barriers and what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons. Either humans were incredibly foolish, or there was much more here than met the eye. "Your reputation precedes you, Admiral," Vexteller responded, multiple voice sacs vibrating in harmony. "The Council has concerns about your species' rapid military advancement." "Understandable," Chen replied, leading them toward the main complex. "Though I suspect you'll find our methods rather different from what you're expecting." The first indication that something was amiss came as they passed the junior cadets' quarters. Rather than the sterile, regulated environments common to most species' military facilities, these humans lived in deliberate discomfort. Rooms were kept at varying temperatures, atmospheric pressures changed randomly, and sleep cycles appeared completely irregular. "Surely this is some form of punishment?" Vexteller inquired, gesturing toward a group of cadets doing physical exercises in what appeared to be artificially heightened gravity. Chen's smile contained no warmth. "On the contrary, this is basic adaptation training. Humans are remarkably adaptable creatures, Commander. We've found that exposing our cadets to controlled environmental stress early in their training significantly enhances their performance in real-world situations." They continued through the facility, and Vexteller's unease grew. In one chamber, cadets were subjected to sensory deprivation while solving complex tactical scenarios. In another, they practiced combat maneuvers in complete darkness, relying solely on touch and sound. The most disturbing aspect wasn't the training itself, but rather the cadets' reactions, or lack thereof. They showed no signs of distress, no indication that these conditions were anything but normal. "Your species seems to have an unusual relationship with discomfort," Vexteller observed, watching a group of cadets voluntarily submit themselves to what appeared to be pain endurance training. "Pain is information," Chen stated matter-of-factly. "We teach our cadets to process it, understand it, and ultimately use it. The galaxy is a harsh place, Commander. We prefer our soldiers to discover that fact here, in controlled conditions, rather than in the field." The tour continued into the tactical training wing, where Vexteller observed something that made their crystalline appendages vibrate with alarm. The simulations being run weren't focused on victory through superior firepower or advanced technology. Instead, they emphasized adaptation, improvisation, and what the humans called thinking outside the box. In one scenario, a small group of cadets was tasked with defending a position against a numerically superior force with advanced technology. Rather than following conventional military doctrine, they employed tactics that seemed to border on madness, using the environment in unexpected ways, creating diversions that preyed on psychological weaknesses, and implementing solutions that no rational military strategist would consider. "This is not military training," Vexteller finally declared, their voice sacs trembling. This is the cultivation of chaos." Admiral Chen's expression remained neutral, but there was a glint in her eyes that Vexteller found deeply unsettling. "Chaos," she repeated. "No, Commander. This is adaptation. This is survival. This is humanity preparing for a universe that has repeatedly underestimated us." As they approached the end of the first day's tour, Vexteller realized with growing horror that they had completely misunderstood humanity's potential threat to galactic stability. It wasn't their technology that made them dangerous, nor their physical capabilities. It was their mindset, their ability to thrive in conditions that would break most species, their eagerness to push beyond conventional limitations, and their seemingly innate capacity to turn disadvantages into advantages. "I believe I've seen enough for today," Vex Taller announced, trying to keep their voice steady. "Oh." Chen's smile widened slightly. "But Commander, we've only just begun. Tomorrow, we'll show you the advanced training facilities." As Vex Taller retired to their quarters that night, they began composing their preliminary report to the Galactic Council. The first line read, "Humanity is not simply another emerging spacefaring species. They are something far more dangerous. They are a species that has turned their own evolutionary disadvantages into weapons, and they are teaching their young to do the same with ruthless efficiency." The commander's sensory crystals dimmed as they contemplated what they would witness in the days to come. Sleep would not come easily that night. Continued in Part 2. Beyond Physical Limits. The second day of Commander Vexteller's inspection began in what the humans called the Crucible, a massive underground complex designed to push cadets beyond their physical limits. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and determination, a combination that made Vexteller's olfactory sensors recoil in discomfort. "Today we'll demonstrate how we prepare our cadets for extreme environmental conditions," Admiral Chen announced, leading them onto an observation platform overlooking multiple training zones. "As you know, humans are not naturally equipped for survival in most of the galaxy's hostile environments." Vexteller's sensing crystals pulsed in agreement. Humans lacked natural armor, had no inherent resistance to radiation, and required a narrow band of environmental conditions to survive. By all logical measures, they should have been confined to their homeworld or limited to carefully controlled colonial environments. The first demonstration shattered that assumption. Below them, a group of cadets was preparing to enter what appeared to be a chamber designed to simulate the surface of a gas giant's moon. The atmospheric pressure would be crushing, the temperature well below freezing, and the gravity nearly triple Earth standard. Their environmental suits appeared surprisingly primitive compared to galactic standards. "Surely you don't expect them to survive these conditions?" Vexteller questioned. "Survive?" Chen's laugh was sharp. "We expect them to complete their mission objectives. Watch." The cadets moved with practiced efficiency, their movements precise despite the crushing pressure and gravity. When one of their environmental suits developed a leak, a scenario Vexteller later learned was deliberately induced, they didn't panic. Instead, they implemented emergency protocols that seemed to defy basic physics, using their own body heat and a series of chemical reactions to create a temporary seal. "Impossible," Vexteller muttered, their translator struggling to convey their disbelief. "Humans have a saying, Commander. Necessity is the mother of invention. When conventional solutions fail, we create new ones." They moved to another section where cadets were practicing survival in zero gravity while being bombarded with various forms of radiation. Instead of relying solely on shielding technology, they were teaching their bodies to function with minimal protection, developing biological resistance through controlled exposure. "This is barbaric," Vexteller observed, watching a cadet continue their assigned tasks despite clear signs of radiation sickness. "This is preparation," Chen corrected. "Every human who graduates from this academy will know exactly how their body responds to extreme conditions. They'll know their limits, and more importantly, they'll know how to exceed them when necessary." The most disturbing demonstration came in the underwater combat arena. Humans were not aquatic creatures, yet these cadets were engaging in complex tactical exercises in pressurized environments that should have been lethal. They moved with an unnatural grace, using the water's resistance to their advantage rather than fighting against it. "How long can they maintain this level of performance?" Vexteller asked, noting that some cadets had been submerged for an alarming length of time. "That's the interesting thing about humans," Chen replied. "The more we practice pushing our limits, the further those limits seem to extend." These cadets started with basic underwater survival training. Now they can operate in these conditions almost indefinitely. The day continued with demonstrations of human adaptability that increasingly defied explanation. Cadets training in environments that mimicked the surfaces of volcanic whirls, the crushing depths of gas giant atmospheres, and the vacuum of space itself. Each scenario seemed designed not just to test survival, but to teach mastery over conditions that should have been lethal. Your species appears to have an unusual relationship with the concept of impossible, Vextaler noted as they observed a group of cadets developing new techniques for surviving hard vacuum exposure without conventional protection. Impossible is just a word humans use to describe something we haven't figured out how to do yet, Chen responded. Every limitation we've encountered has eventually become another tool in our arsenal. As the day drew to a close, Vextaler found themselves adding to their report. Humanity's greatest weapon may be their refusal to accept their own limitations. They do not simply adapt to survive. They adapt to thrive in conditions that should render them extinct. Their training methods suggest a species preparing not just for war, but for evolution itself. The commander's crystalline appendages flickered with a new frequency, one that their species used to denote existential dread. They were beginning to understand why the Galactic Council was so concerned about humanity's rapid advancement. It wasn't just their technology or their tactics that made them dangerous. It was their fundamental nature, their ability to take environments and conditions that should kill them and turn them into advantages. Their training wasn't creating soldiers. It was creating something entirely new, beings who viewed the impossible as simply the next challenge to overcome. Continued in Part 3. The Mind Games. The third day of inspection brought Commander Vextaler to what the humans cryptically called the Mind Forge. Unlike the physical training facilities, this section of the academy was eerily quiet, its corridors lined with rooms where cadets sat in apparent stillness, their minds engaged in battles that left no visible scars. "Welcome to where we truly shape our future defenders," Admiral Chen said, her voice deliberately lowered. "Physical adaptation is important, but it's here that we develop our most powerful weapons." Vextaler's sensing crystals detected unusual patterns of electromagnetic activity throughout the facility. "You're conducting psychological warfare training." "Among other things," Chen replied with a slight smile. "We found that the mind's potential for adaptation far exceeds that of the body." The first demonstration involved what the humans called tactical empathy, the ability to not just understand an opponent's psychology, but to predict and manipulate it. Cadets were connected to neural interfaces, engaging in simulated negotiations and conflicts with AI constructs modeled after various alien species. What disturbed Vextaler wasn't the technology, which was relatively primitive by galactic standards, but the approach. The cadets weren't just learning to respond to their opponent's actions. They were learning to shape those actions, to influence decisions before they were made. This cadet just convinced a simulated hive mind collective to act against its own interests. Vextaler observed, their voice sacs vibrating with concern. "How is this possible?" "Humans have a unique ability to understand patterns while simultaneously thinking beyond them," Chen explained. "We don't just study how other species think, we learn to think like them. And then we learn to think beyond them." The next section showcased what the humans called crisis innovation, scenarios designed to force creative problem-solving under extreme psychological pressure. Cadets were presented with impossible situations and required to find solutions using limited resources and information. Vextaler watched in growing alarm as the trainees consistently found ways to turn seemingly hopeless scenarios to their advantage. They didn't just solve problems, they redefined them, approaching each challenge from angles that seemed to defy logical progression. "Your species appears to have an almost pathological aversion to accepting defeat," Vextaler noted, observing a cadet who had just turned a simulated total systems failure into an unexpected victory. "Defeat is just another word for learning opportunity," Chen responded. "We found that the most valuable innovations often come from situations where conventional victory is impossible." The most unsettling revelation came in the quantum psychology wing, where cadets were being trained to maintain cognitive coherence across multiple probability streams. It was a field of study that most species considered too dangerous to pursue, yet humans were deliberately exposing their young to these mind-bending concepts. This type of training typically causes severe psychological trauma in most species, Vexteller pointed out, watching a cadet navigate through what appeared to be several simultaneous but contradictory realities. Humans have a remarkable capacity for cognitive dissonance, Chen explained. What breaks other minds often just makes ours more flexible. We've learned to use that trait to our advantage. As they observed more training sessions, Vexteller began to understand something fundamental about human psychology. Their apparent irrationality, what other species often dismissed as primitive emotional responses, was actually a sophisticated form of mental adaptation. Your entire training program seems designed to create minds that operate outside normal parameters, Vexteller observed. This isn't standardized military training. This is evolution in action. Every challenge humanity has faced has forced us to adapt, Chen acknowledged. We've learned to turn that necessity into a strength. Our cadets don't just learn to fight. They learn to think in ways that make victory possible, even when it should be mathematically impossible. Vexteller added to their report that evening. The true danger of humanity lies not in their weapons or their technology, but in their cognitive architecture. They are creating warriors whose minds operate beyond the boundaries of conventional logic, capable of turning psychological warfare back upon itself. They don't just think outside the box, they refuse to acknowledge that the box exists. The commander's sensing crystals pulsed with a new frequency as they contemplated the implications. Humanity wasn't just preparing for war, they were preparing for forms of conflict that other species hadn't even imagined yet. Their greatest weapon wasn't their ability to fight, it was their ability to reimagine the very nature of conflict itself. Continued in Part 4. Unconventional Warfare. On the fourth day, Commander Vexteller was introduced to what the humans euphemistically called their Alternative Strategies Division. The facility looked deceptively simple, a series of interconnected chambers with minimal equipment and few obvious training tools. Today, you'll see how we prepare our cadets for asymmetric warfare, Admiral Chen announced, her tone notably more serious than previous days. After all, humanity rarely finds itself in situations where we have the advantage of superior numbers or technology. Vexteller's sensing crystals flickered with interest. You train specifically for disadvantageous scenarios. We train for reality, Chen corrected. And the reality is that humans have usually had to fight smarter, not stronger. The first demonstration showcased what the humans called environmental manipulation. Cadets were placed in simulated environments with minimal resources and tasked with turning their surroundings into weapons. What Vexteller witnessed defied conventional military logic. They watched as trainees transformed ordinary materials into improvised tools and weapons, using basic chemistry and physics in ways that no standard military manual would suggest. One group created a makeshift electromagnetic pulse device from scavenged electronics. Another turned atmospheric conditions into a weapon by manipulating pressure differentials. This isn't warfare, Vexteller protested. This is chaos engineering. Exactly, Chen smiled. Chaos is just another tool in our arsenal. Most species try to impose order on battlefield conditions. We teach our cadets to embrace and weaponize disorder itself. The next section focused on what humans called adaptive tactics. Cadets were presented with constantly changing battlefield conditions and required to modify their strategies in real time. What impressed and disturbed Vexteller wasn't just their ability to adapt, but their eagerness to abandon working strategies in favor of unpredictable new approaches. Your trainees deliberately seek out strategic chaos, Vexteller observed, watching a squad intentionally create and then exploit battlefield confusion. Most species view unpredictability as a liability. Most species haven't survived what humanity has survived, Chen responded. Every major advancement in human military doctrine came from being forced to think differently. We've learned to institutionalize that process. The afternoon's demonstrations focused on psychological warfare tactics that made Vextiller's species' most advanced deception techniques seem primitive by comparison. The cadets weren't just learning to mislead enemies. They were learning to reshape reality itself in their opponents' minds. Notice how they're not just creating false information, Chen explained, gesturing to a group of cadets orchestrating an elaborate deception scenario. They're creating entire false contexts. By the time an enemy realizes they're being deceived, their own assumptions have become weapons against them. Vextaller watched as training scenarios unfolded, each more disturbing than the last. Cadets learned to turn enemy protocols against themselves, to exploit the very concepts of military doctrine and chain of command. They didn't just break rules, they transformed them into tactical advantages. Your species seems to have an unusual relationship with established military principles, Vextaller noted, their sensing crystals pulsing with concern. Principles are tools, Commander. Sometimes the most effective way to use a tool is to reinvent its purpose entirely. The day's final demonstration involved what humans called victory state redefinition. Scenarios where cadets were tasked with achieving objectives through means that technically didn't qualify as combat at all. I don't understand, Vextaller admitted, watching a squad complete a mission without firing a single shot or engaging in any conventional military action. How is this warfare? That's exactly the question we want our enemies asking. Chen smiled. The best victory is the one your opponent doesn't even recognize as defeat until it's too late. That evening, Vextaller added to their report, humanity's approach to warfare transcends conventional military theory. They are not simply training soldiers. They are creating architects of chaos who view the very concepts of warfare and victory as malleable tools rather than fixed principles. Continued in Part 5. The final assessment. On the final day of inspection, Commander Vextaller was led to a simple conference room overlooking the Academy's sprawling grounds. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training fields below, where cadets continued their relentless preparation for futures they couldn't possibly predict. I imagine you have questions, Admiral Chen said, settling into a chair across from the alien dignitary. Most inspectors do by this point. Vextaller's sensing crystals pulsed with a complex mixture of frequencies, fear, admiration, and something close to awe. Your entire training philosophy seems designed to create warriors who think beyond conventional boundaries of warfare. Not warriors, Chen corrected gently. Survivors. Everything you've seen here is built on one fundamental truth. Humanity has always been at a disadvantage. We're not stronger, faster, or naturally more capable than most species. We don't have biological weapons or natural armor. What we do have is an unmatched ability to adapt and overcome. You're creating something new, Vextaller observed. These aren't just soldiers. They're evolution in action, Chen finished. Every challenge humanity has faced has forced us to adapt. We've simply learned to accelerate that process. The implications made Vextaller's secondary nervous system pulse with alarm. The Galactic Council fears you're preparing for war. We're preparing for survival, Chen responded. There's a difference. Every species trains their military to win conflicts. We train ours to redefine the very nature of conflict itself. Looking out over the Academy grounds, Vextaller finally understood why humanity terrified so many older species. They weren't just another emerging civilization developing military capabilities. They were something far more dangerous, a species that had turned adaptation itself into a weapon. My report to the Council will not be reassuring, Vextaller said finally. I wouldn't expect it to be, Chen replied. But perhaps you could include one final observation. Everything you've seen here, everything that disturbs you about our methods, it all stems from one simple truth. Humanity doesn't train for the battles we expect to fight. We train for the ones we never see coming. As Vextaller prepared to depart, they added one final note to their report. Humanity's greatest weapon isn't their technology, their tactics, or even their remarkable adaptability. It's their fundamental understanding that evolution never stops. They haven't just accepted this truth, they've turned it into their greatest advantage. The galaxy must decide if it's ready for a species that views its own limitations as nothing more than temporary obstacles to be overcome. The commander's transport lifted off from Earth's surface, leaving behind an academy that would continue to push the boundaries of what was possible. As they watched the blue planet recede into the distance, Vextiller couldn't shake the feeling that they had witnessed not just the future of warfare, but the future of evolution itself. The galaxy would never be the same.